Hey everyone, and welcome back to Gigging Out. I'm your host, Dana Gagnon, CMO at Every, and today I speak with Bryan Wilson, co-founder and VP of Strategy at StaffUpApp, a white label mobile staffing platform. In this episode, Bryan dives into the challenges facing SMB staffing companies. We explore how smaller firms can effectively compete with industry giants, shedding light on the importance of digital transformation and the nuances of automating critical processes. Bryan highlights why transitioning to mobile and platform-based solutions is critical and how to approach the decision-making process between building and buying solutions. Bryan also emphasizes the importance of improving candidate and worker experiences with strategies to improve engagement and satisfaction. This episode is full of actionable insights. Enjoy. Welcome, Bryan. I'm so glad you're here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dana. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, so let's kick things off. Go ahead. Tell me a little bit about your background and what led you to StaffUp.
I actually got started in the recruiting and staffing industry right out of high school. Actually, I had gotten back from an exchange program over in Switzerland and kind of fast-tracked high school. And I was washing windows one summer, and a buddy I knew was a recruiter. And all of a sudden, he was like making all of this money. And I asked him what he did. And long story short, he got me an interview with a local staffing company. So I went in, I was 17, became like a sourcer, right? Just the person out there, like kind of finding resumes and qualifying people to kind of come into the top of funnel, if you will, and then quickly got promoted to be a recruiter. And this was kind of one of those agencies where it's all about phone time, right? So my introduction, we didn't have a lot of software. We just had, a phone book and a phone. Right. And my interview, when I came in, I thought it was going to be all these questions like, tell us about yourself. Would you be a good contributor to the team? Whatever. And it was, here's a phone, pick it up. Here's a script, start calling. Right. And so it was pretty intense, but I actually took to it pretty well. And, ended up growing through the company, stayed there for 4 or 5 years. And then right at the height of the dot-com boom, I now am just like barely able to drink. Right. And I thought I knew everything there was to know about business. So I decided to go out on my own and start my own staffing company. And, I think it was 2-3 months after the staffing company started and we thought we knew everything about this business, the dot-com bubble burst, right? We were in technology staffing. And so we pretty much lost most of our clients overnight because, we're selling staffing services to like, PetSmart.com and, things like that. Right. And so just had to reinvent ourselves for literally the next 4 years. So I think I tried every part of staffing that there was, right? We couldn't do technology. So we tried engineering, then we tried pharmaceutical, and we tried healthcare and all these different areas. Eventually got a pretty good niche inside of healthcare staffing. So long story short, sold that company, went into the software side of things. So went through like software sales stint for a while, and then eventually came back and worked for the first software that we use in our staffing company, a company called CBizSoft, and headed up sales and marketing for them. Stayed with them for 4 or 5 years, or 5 or 6 years, and then ended up leaving and going to another company called JobAdder. They hired me to head up their North America operations. So they were an applicant tracking system company based out of Australia. And so they wanted to expand it in North America. And so they hired me to kind of lead that expansion. And that went pretty good. We grew the company to about 25 people on my team, got about 500 clients on board. And, those are still going strong. But as we built that company, we had lots of different partners that we integrated with and stuff. And partnerships have always been a main way for me to kind of grow and build things, right? So my current partner, a guy named Rick Richard, he had built this company called StaffUpApp. And we integrated together at first, right? So had JobAdder and StaffUpApp talking together. But eventually I realized there was so much potential in what he was doing. There was such this like unaddressed part of the market that needed to be filled, that I ended up joining him as a partner, and that's how we got started, right? And now we're deep in the middle of it.
Tell me about StaffUp. What are you all about? What problems are you solving?
It all centers around staffing companies, right? The best place to start is that there's 1,000,001 software companies out there that serve the recruiting and the staffing industry, and a lot of them were kind of built and kind of got started, I would say like in the late 90s, and then kind of grew to a point to where they've gotten to this safe place, I guess is the best way to put it. And there's not a lot of innovation that seems to be going on inside of these companies because they're serving a lot like the small and medium-sized businesses, right? When you talk about like these giant staffing companies, a lot of times they have their own proprietary systems that they've built and those kind of things, right? But the small, medium-sized market is really underserved, in my opinion, especially when it comes to innovation, especially when it comes to the type of tech they could utilize to kind of leverage kind of a quantum leap in what they're doing. So that's what StaffUp does. We build technology that up until now, only these really large staffing enterprises have access to, and we're kind of giving that to these smaller medium-sized type staffing companies. That's the high level. I could get into more specifics, but that's kind of what we do. And it's all centered around mobile as a focus, a mobile staffing platform.
That's great. So why mobile? I mean, I think, can you speak to why that's an important trend for SMB staffing companies to adopt?
Yeah, well, my guess is that you probably have a cell phone in your pocket, and it'd be harder for you to find somebody that doesn't have a cell phone in their pocket these days, right? The truth is that it's a much easier way to reach a workforce these days, right? Especially when you talk about the types of staffing companies that we serve, right? They're typically mobile workforce populations, right? So these could be blue collar, like in light industrial type situations, nursing, hospitality. These are people, unlike you and me that probably work much more in an office setting, right? And can work from anywhere. These people are actually going to physical locations, sometimes different locations throughout the day. They're not sitting in front of a computer, right? So like the best way to communicate with them isn't typically via email or those kind of things. And furthermore, most of these populations already have experience with some type of like a gig work platform, right? So they've already experimented with Uber or Instacart, or there's a bunch of them out there we could name, right? So I think staffing companies are maybe not even knowing that they're competing with a lot of these gig platforms. And the experiences that workers already are accustomed to, and they need to kind of get there, right? So that's why mobile.
I love that you brought up competition because I think you frame up really nicely. I think it was on your LinkedIn. You said something like, you think you're not just competing with the other staffing company down the street, you're competing with tech companies. And you talk about mobile technology, but in general, digital transformation is still a term that is kicked around a lot in the staffing industry. And that term feels so daunting, I'm sure, to a, staffing company owner who's really just focused on recruiting the best talent, deploying the best talent. How would you break down that term for them? How should they be thinking about innovating with technology if they're a small to medium-sized staffing company?
I guess don't kill off what already is great about staffing, right? It is the people, right? So like that part, most staffing companies have right? I mean, a lot of people get into staffing because they truly do want to help people get to work, right? It's not purely about the profit motive. There is some stuff in there that they want to do. So you don't want to get rid of that, right? But you still need the technology in order to compete, in order to give that candidate experience, right? So like you mentioned, there's two kind of big pressures. There's the big staffing companies that are already investing in mobile technologies and AI and all these other things, right? And then you also have these technology companies like the Ubers of the world that are coming in and trying to do a 100% technology focused platform, right? Where there really aren't any other humans involved. So I would say you need to find that sweet spot. You need to leverage what's great about staffing, the personal relationships, whether that's your clients, your candidates, like actually being able to help people find work. But you also need to find a way to weave in that technology and provide that experience at the same time, right? I'm sure we can get deeper into that, but that's my overarching theory and advice.
Yeah. So automate what should be automated, but keep the personal interactions as much as you can on things that should not be automated. Is that kind of a summary of how you'd approach it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people say that. I think that, there's a lot of tools out there like automation platforms, different CRMs and ATSs are kind of introducing this stuff. I think in particular, mobile is something that people should be focused on. Of course, I'm biased, right? But when we look at automation in the industry, there's a bunch of companies that have kind of sprung up to kind of add this automation layer into applicant tracking systems, CRM systems, things like that. In my opinion, it's a lot of times to make up for the lack of what the ATS should already be doing, right? Mobile is a great way to drive automation, but it also reduces the need for some of this like weird automation that I see people doing. All these like, okay, if a status gets updated to this, then we should put people into this thing that sends this text message in this email and drives them back to a person that's manually entering a job order into a system to then manually call some candidates and, and get them filled for a role, right? Whereas like you go to a gig platform, the technologies companies have figured this out. No, employer enters job. Every candidate that's qualified gets an instant notification. Like we're talking milliseconds, and they fill that thing within a minute or two, not a week or a day or a month, right? So that's true automation, in my opinion. Like you don't need to build some crazy cadence that re-engages people 1 week before their assignment starts so you can hopefully get them reassigned. If they've got a mobile app, they open up, they see all the assignments that are coming up after their current end date, and they just book it themselves, right? There's nothing that needs to get involved. So automation, yes, but just a better platform in general that takes out all the need for all these little extra things that people have to do manually, right?
What do you tell staffing leaders who are debating this like build versus buy when it comes to innovating with technology? I know I've talked to companies and they're like, well, there's no solution out there that has everything I need. So I think I'm just going to hire some engineers and have them build it for me. How should they do that evaluation on, is there something out of the box that can get me most of the way there or all the way there, or should I invest in actually building this thing myself? Can you talk about how you think they should approach that?
I think it comes down to kind of the typical, business problem or life problem. And do you have more money than time or more time than money right now, right? Building software is not easy. It's not as easy as just posting something on Upwork and saying, I need a piece of software. Can you build this? And then it magically turns out the way that you want it to turn out, at the end of a few months, right? First off, like the time horizon you're thinking of any type of project, and when it comes to software, double or triple that, right? And the cost you're thinking, you can probably do the same thing as well. And then you need to consider like the maintenance costs, right? So even if you're able to do this magically, inexpensively, quickly, which is highly unlikely, have you ever done this before? Do you know what it means to manage products? Do you know what it means to manage engineers? Do you know what it means to hold them accountable, to give them the proper design specs? Like, there's design and stuff involved too, right? It's not just, so there's a lot that's involved. And I would say if you're an Adecco or something like that, and you've got a team of developers and you've got product managers and you've got designers, great. That's probably a great move for you. But if you're a, sub $20 million staffing company and your core business has always been staffing, building something on your own, 9 times out of 10, when I've seen anybody do this, they've sunk millions of dollars into it. And at the end, they scrap the tool, right? So better to partner with somebody. There are kind of gray areas too, right? There are companies that do kind of true, pure SaaS. This is what you get. And sure, we'll take your feature request. We might build it, we might not. And there's other companies that also take a little bit more of a private label, like, hey, depending on the type of company you are, we can work together to build custom features too. So there is kind of middle road solutions as well.
What advice do you have for people to research those solutions? Because one of the things I've heard from staffing leaders is they're so busy. A lot of times they're wearing a lot of hats. They're still filling roles themselves. And they don't even have time to vet software solutions that are out there. Are there certain resources you would point them to? Any recommendations there?
The best thing you could possibly do if you want to use technology to make a difference in your business, which you should be doing, whether you're a staffing company or any other type of company, is hire somebody for your team that gets this, that loves it, that wants to do it, that can take ownership of it, right? If you're a founder and you're saying, I don't have time to research this stuff, a lot of staffing founders, they don't like dealing with it either, right? They got in this business because they're people. They know the staffing business. They don't know the software business. They don't want to get into automation. So they go through this endless cycle of every 3 years, we're going to evaluate systems. We're going to get a new one and we're going to hope it does better than the last one. Hire a data analyst, hire a marketing guru. People have different job titles for them, but essentially like hire a hacker, right? Hire somebody that's young, that gets technology, that when they start talking these AR terms, things like that, they get it inherently. These are people that like, they can kind of do, it's like a hybrid of marketing, of technology, of operations, of like process, right? You can find people right out of college that they don't need an applicant tracking system. They can tie stuff together with a modern CRM, with Zapier, with other really cool tools and just really automate the crap out of your business, right? And you don't have to do any of that. So yeah, sorry, you're in the staffing and recruiting business. Like solve your problem through staffing the right person for your company. And it should be somebody that loves technology and operations.
I love that. That's great advice. We've talked a lot about the technology piece. I'm curious, what are some of the other biggest challenges that you're hearing in the SMB staffing space in particular, that companies are facing? What's getting them hung up?
In general, I mean, I guess I'm pretty focused on the technology side. So my brain always goes to that, right? The things that people come to me with typically surround like, how do we hire people faster? How do we stay in compliance better, right? How do we make sure that the people that we're hiring, they might have had a license now, but if they're going out on a long-term assignment, how do we make sure that that license hasn't expired by the time that ends? Right. So keeping track of those kind of things, right? The other big thing is that I think there's a lot of all the time people coming in and saying, here, I've got the perfect solution for you, and being able to kind of weed through that. Right. So I'm probably the first person that's going to say like AI is great, but it's not as great as you might think it is. You know what I mean? It's not going to come in and solve all of your problems. The problem with AI is that if you haven't invested in a good process already, it's going to just exacerbate. It's going to exacerbate either a good process or a bad process, right? So, yeah, I mean, I guess people coming to me, that's typically what they come to me for. The biggest thing that I notice when I'm speaking with staffing companies and leaders typically does surround building better processes, right? Especially when they have multiple branches. They might have gone through consolidation or acquisitions or things like that, being able to kind of paint a vision for the entire company and a process that everybody can kind of adhere to and follow. And it doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, it should be simple, but making those things, but simplifying those processes is sometimes the hardest thing to do. And I've done a lot of work with people to help them just kind of simplify that process, right?
Yeah, I'm curious. You mentioned AI. What are some of the applications that staffing companies are exploring with AI, and kind of what are the things that you're a little bit skeptical of? Can you talk to that?
A lot of it comes around like text communications, right? So simply like, hey, maybe our recruiters right now are have a text solution or a chat solution or something like that, right? How can we bring on some virtual agent that can essentially answer those same kind of questions or things like that? Maybe it's like an intake for a candidate or taking a job order or something like that, right? If this, then that type questions or whatever. Those are chatbots, and some people call those AI. True AI is going to be more like, okay, let's set this thing loose and hopefully it doesn't like offend anybody, right? That's how I see people using it. The most common things are like now, hey, I've created a job order in my system. Click a button, and AI is going to go in and maybe reword that so that it attracts people better, maybe attracts a more diverse audience of candidates. So you get more bang for your buck in terms of the ad itself. Email copy, right? I wrote this email, AI, make it a little bit better for me, kind of a thing. What are some other ways that people are using that for? Yeah, I mean, recruiting has always been good in terms of like matching. I think, people are calling AI like resume and job matching, but in the recruiting industry, we've been doing that for a long time, right? But in theory, that's kind of what AI also does, is let's match the right candidate to the right contact, build shortlists faster, those kind of things.
Well, those are good ones. I mean, you touched on candidate experience, I know, and improving the candidate experience is something that you say that StaffUp helps a lot with. And obviously the mobile side, certainly there's a generation of people working for staffing firms that want that mobile experience. But what are some of the other things that you think are important for staffing companies to do to create a better candidate experience? Can you speak to that?
Less logins altogether, right? Nobody likes having 5 different passwords for different things. So however you need to do that, like figure that out. There's lots of good single sign-on technology, things like that, right? The other thing about staffing in particular is just how people, log their time and get paid for their time, right? It's funny, like my mother-in-law still does some like temporary work every now and then. She's a teacher, but she like does this like testing or whatever. She still works with a staffing company to do that. It's just like 1 or 2 days a month kind of a thing. When she logs her time, she has to drop it by the staffing agency's office and put it under the door, right? Like there's better ways of doing this, people. And if your candidates find another staffing agency that makes it easier on them, that's where they're going to go, right? Tying that back into getting paid, right? Like nobody wants to wait to get paid, right? So I think the gig platforms of the world have figured that out, right? And that's why they're moving to this type of model to where they can actually say, hey, you just worked, you just got paid, right? I think that is incredibly important for staffing companies to realize that there are companies that are already doing this. And if you're waiting to enable that for your workforce, then you're going to get left behind. And the other thing I'll say about that is I think it goes beyond like profits and candidate experience, and it goes to like helping people out at a fundamental level. Like I am like in my heart opposed to these like payday loan type companies out there. I feel like they prey on the most vulnerable of our population. And the reason that those exist is because people have this gap from when they work to when they get paid every single week or every other week or whatever that is, right? They go and now they're paying like 10, 20, 50% on the low money that they just made. And I think that that's criminal. And I think that if a staffing company can eliminate the need for doing that, then not only is it better for business, retain more candidates, but it's just like the right thing to do. And we have the technology to do it.
Speaking right to my heart, obviously what we believe at Every. And I think there's this huge misconception that, faster pay is really only relevant to, lower wage, maybe hourly, gig work. But we've done a ton of research, in healthcare staffing, for instance. The vast majority of healthcare workers we surveyed live paycheck to paycheck. The vast majority say they would pick one staffing firm over another if they got paid faster, if they got paid right after a shift. And I've seen, weekly pay seems to be the norm in the industry, but, even that anymore is starting to get disrupted. Or some, I still talk to companies all the time that are on 2 weeks or maybe even a month, where, it's taking them a month to pay people. And I think you're spot on that's going to change significantly, as competition just gets more and more fierce for talent. So
think about the mentality of like, event workers and stuff too, right? It's like if you need a bunch of bartenders tonight or event servers or whatever, right? And they're like, oh, if I do this gig, it's only going to take me like 8 hours or whatever. And then I've got money to pay my bill tomorrow, right? Versus, oh, maybe I'll find another way to make that money or whatever, right? So I think it affects fill rates as well. Just by the mentality of once you have these people onboarded, boom, they get a notification. Great. I know when I work, I get paid, right? It definitely affects that.
Yeah. And it even, I think, goes a long way. Just it eliminates any concern or uncertainty. We hear a lot of times companies want to speed up pay just so that they stop getting questions about where's my money. So, if the longer you hold on to people's money, the more you're going to get bugged. And this happens. I mean, I talk to like locums agencies and they're like, doctors are hitting me up all the time. And so this is, at all levels. And I think, yeah, if you can cut back and just people work, they get paid. I mean, that's what we believe. And I think it's where the industry is going for sure.
Yeah, just because you make $400K a year doesn't mean you still don't live paycheck to paycheck, right?
It's so true. Yeah, it's so true. I'm curious, what advice would you give maybe like a CEO of a SMB staffing company that you think no one else, that they wouldn't hear from someone else?
It's invest in the candidate experience above all else. I mean, I wouldn't say that they don't hear that from other people, but I think that I don't think people take it actually to heart. right? So I think like stepping back and truly taking that to heart, like look outside of your industry, right? I think a lot of staffing companies, they get together at these conferences and that's great. Like what's working for you, what's not working or whatever, right? But they don't tend to look outside of their industry and what's working for other industries, right? Like I talked about this like from the ATS space in the beginning, right? Like there's not a lot of innovation that I see happening, especially with like the big incumbents in the space. But there's a whole ton of innovation going on in the general CRM market, right? Like what are CRM platforms doing that ATS companies aren't doing that you could perhaps leverage or learn from, right? One thing in particular, I guess, as an example, I could say is that like in the software industry in particular, centralizing support, right? So having a little widget on your website that allows you to live chat with people instead of like having, if you've got 50 recruiters on your team, like why do we make candidates go and talk to 50 different individual people? There's a lot of attrition in staffing. When that person leaves, that relationship is gone with that candidate. So consider like, learning from software companies and centralizing your communication. Have a centralized inbox for recruiting, a centralized inbox for clients. You can still assign those to people and that kind of stuff. But if that person's sick or they get let go or something like that, like the relationship doesn't drop off. So that's just like one example, I think, of where a staffing company could learn from software, but there's like so many others that would apply as well.
Can you talk about, speaking of building software, as you were building StaffUp, I mean, this is a super complex industry to build software for. What were some of the challenges you encountered? How did you overcome them? Can you speak to that?
Building what we're building is still a challenge, right? Because it comes down to an educational piece more than anything. What we ended up doing is we started just by building a mobile app, just like a job board, right? It's like if you go and you Google this, you'll find out that I think it's like 70 or 80% of Indeed's traffic, job search traffic, is through their mobile app, right? Or a mobile device. So whether people are downloading Indeed's app or they're doing it, or they're just going to the Indeed's website, the vast, vast majority of that is through a mobile device. So we got started in saying, hey, let's just give people the ability to have a job board in their pocket that's their brand. And instead of paying Indeed every single month, advertise your app on Instagram, on LinkedIn, those things, download that and stop paying Indeed so much, right? Or as you keep going, your clients just ask you to do more and more and more, right? So I think the challenge that came up is that we've got clients that are in dental staffing, we've got clients that are in industrial staffing, we've got clients in nursing, hospitality. And while that sounds like it's the same, it's definitely not. Like they all have very specific nuances and things like that. So we've rebuilt some of our systems 2 or 3 times now because it's like, oh man, we need a new foundation to do this. Like this can't just work this way. It has to be like configurable at this level and at that level and at this level. So I don't know if we could have ever done it a different way, right? Hindsight's always 2020. Those are the challenges we're still dealing with. Let me just put it that way. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Did you ever consider just building for one sub-vertical in staffing before trying to serve multiple ones?
It's something I think about daily.
In hindsight, yeah.
I'm like, again, hindsight's 2020, right? And, you go back and you listen to even the Steve Jobs of the world and they're focused on this one thing. And, we love our clients. We love who we work with. And every time we've said, hey, should we just stop and focus on just this one thing? We realize how far that we've come and how successful our clients are being. And we know that it's just, we can't go back at this point, right? Now, if you ask me if I'm expanding into technology staffing and, all these other areas, like no, we're going to stay laser focused in healthcare and industrial for now. But yeah, that was definitely a big lesson. If I started all over again, I probably would have started with one.
I'm curious, like, how do you envision StaffUp evolving? Where do you see yourself as a company? Where do you hope to be a year from now, maybe 5 years from now?
I think we have an opportunity to fundamentally change staffing for the better, right? And empower all these small and medium-sized companies to really get out there and thrive, right? It's not easy, but I know for a fact that, mobile is not going away. People are not going to regress in terms of their preferences or anything like that, right? So I see it as our mission to get people to kind of up with the modern age so we can just get to that next step, right? I think that every staffing agency in America in the next 5 to 10 years is going to have a mobile app, right? In some way or another. It's the same way websites were, in the 90s, right? It's like, okay, when websites first came out for staffing agencies, it was very hard to convince them that they needed one, right? But if you don't have one in this day and age, like, who are you, right? And if you look at mobile app usage, like anybody can Google this. Just Google like percentage of internet traffic, desktop compared to mobile. 60% of all internet traffic in America, all internet traffic is on mobile devices, right? And that is climbing, right? There's another statistic, you can Google this as well. 75% of Americans by the year 2030 will use mobile devices solely. And this is worldwide, right? So like there's certain countries like Asian countries, African countries, they're much more likely to have mobile devices now and never even have a computer, right? So that statistic might be a little thrown off, looking at specifically America or Australia or something like that. But the trend is clear, like mobile is the preference. That's where people are going. So in that same vein, I think that staffing agencies, in order to thrive, need to employ a technology like that. So, and I think that we're figuring out a way to make that available to everybody.
Any other predictions for the future of staffing? Whether that's a year from now, 5 years from now?
I think a lot of consolidation is going to happen. I think we're already seeing that happen, right? So I think that the smaller companies are seeing that technology is playing a key role in them being acquired. Even some of these bigger companies are looking to smaller companies that are proving better models, right? So if you're a small company, like if your goal is eventually to get acquired, like that's a really good thing to think of, right? But I think just branding in general is going to, so kind of both those, right? There's going to be a lot of consolidation and big brands are going to win in big areas, but also there's going to be a lot more niching down in really highly specific areas with much smaller, but still highly profitable agencies, right? So I think local is going to become a lot bigger again, right? It's like, okay, if, I don't need to go out and try to compete so hard on a national level. I just need to be really, really, really good at providing a one-stop shop and a really great brand in a local market, right? I also see consolidation of services, staffing agencies learning that, I've already got the client. So instead of just offering staffing services, let's get every piece of the pie, right? We can be the local job board. We can be the local marketing agency. We can offer the perm, the temp, all that kind of stuff, right? And build it around a single brand.
I love that. That's great. Yeah. I talked to someone yesterday who they even provide like consulting services. Like they update, all their clients on all the legislation stuff that they should be paying attention to. And so it's a great point that they can diversify their business in so many other ways.
You're already out there working for the leads. You might as well have multiple streams of revenue that you can leverage. And I bring it back to Indeed as well. It's like, Indeed is the largest staffing company on the planet, right? And most staffing companies give a big percentage of their money to Indeed every month. But Indeed is a job board first. They get money through revenue for job postings. And then that gives them the leads that they can then go out and get for their staffing business. Like, think about offering a similar model, but at a micro level.
I always like to end with, if people want to learn more from Bryan, or they want to learn more about StaffUp, where can they find you online?
Yeah, just StaffUpApp.com is our website. And then, I'm on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling these days, Bryan M. Wilson, and also Bryan M. Wilson on LinkedIn as well.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Bryan. I really appreciate it. This was an awesome discussion.
Thank you, Dana.
This podcast was brought to you by Every. We work with gig companies, marketplaces, delivery businesses, and more to pay their workers fast. You can learn more at every.com.